Hi everyone, welcome to the mini tank tutorial. I'll be showing you how to make it sleeveless or with sleeves in the same sample, so I'll direct you on how to make the modifications when we get to that part. And I'll just start off by showing you the materials you need. First thing is a measuring tape, as the tutorial is made to measure. This super cute one's from Lantern Moon. Next, you'll need your needles. I have this Likey interchangeable set, and you'll be needing the 4.5 millimeters with a short cord, so 24 inches. And then you'll also need the 6.5 millimeters, also on a short-ish cord. If you're going to do the sleeve modification, you also need these 12 millimeter, 16-inch short circulars, so the tips are also short. These are from Knitter's Pride, and it's for making the sleeves. If you want your sleeve stitches to be really small and match the sleeve stitches, match the tank stitches, you can also get 6.5 millimeter short circular. I just like mine to be sort of like big and airy. And then last but not least, you'll need a crochet hook. This one is 4.5 millimeters. My tension is somewhat all over the place, so just find whatever works for you. If you think it's too tight or too loose, you might want to go up or down a size. You'll also need some miscellaneous items, so scissors, tapestry needle, stitch markers of various sorts. This is the Buddy box from Delaque. And then last but not least, your yarn. So this is the palette that I've chosen for the sample. This really pretty mohair is from JMR Studios. I got it at the Sheep and Wool Festival. This is some wool cashmere blend from Jade Sapphire Exotic Fibers, I think. This is mohair from Fleece Artist Handmaiden in Violet. The mohair is called Whisker. We have some Peruvian tweed from Gallery Yarns. Some more Peruvian tweed in a different color. I got these online. I don't know if they sell them in stores anymore, but you can Google it. And finally, some wool from Jamie Harmon. So this is my palette. I might not use all these colors, but it's just like the color scheme that I've curated. And I also have a project bag to keep it all in. And yeah. So the way that the tank is constructed is we start here with the ribbing, and then we do like a few rounds in the round. We split off the front and back for this top portion, and then seam the shoulders together. So what you're gonna wanna do first is take your measuring tape and then measure around the circumference of your body, your torso. And if you look at the pictures on my Instagram, you'll see that this basically sits right under your armpits. So like doesn't cover the chest. It's really a harness kind of situation. If you want to modify this so that you have like a really long body, so it's more of an actual tank top, then I would start with your waist measurement. And for me, I don't actually remember my entire measurement, but I've swatched with my yarn before, and I know it comes out to about 90 stitches on the 4.5 millimeters in ribbing. So you'll do a ribbing swatch with the yarn that you've chosen for the cuff. And I usually like to use either wool or alpaca for it. I just feel like it's sturdier than mohair, and also mohair has a tendency to stretch and then it doesn't like bounce back. So I would use wool probably. Alpaca also does have a bit of stretch, but I say it's okay for this. And just to help you figure out how to convert your measurement into like stitches, This is probably self-explanatory for a lot of you, but just in case anyone's curious, this is what I do. I measure my gauge, so let's say 1 inch equals 5 stitches on your ribbed swatch, and I say stretched because ribbing is super stretchy, so I like to, like when I measure it, I like to stretch it out, since we want it to be sort of tight. If 1 inch equals 5 stitches and your total measurement is like 30 inches, oh, sorry, times 5 stitches is 150 stitches. And that's how much you would cast on for your general area. The 90 stitches that I mentioned earlier, I think that fits small to medium. I'm a size medium, almost a large, so I think I'm probably like the highest end you could go with 90 stitches. But whatever number you end up with, you want it to be an even number. So now that you know how many stitches you're going to cast on, I'm going to start with a long tail cast on. I know a lot of people do it in their left hand. For some reason, my grandma taught me to do it on my right hand, so feel free to ignore this part if you already know how to do this. So once you've cast on the appropriate number of stitches, you want to join the round, making sure that your stitches are not twisted. I use the invisible join method, so I cast on 1 extra than I needed. Instead of 90, I have 91 stitches. You basically just take the first stitch, transfer it over to the needle, and then pull the most recent stitch, the extra one, off the needle, transfer it back, and tighten the cast on tails. Place a stitch marker, and you're ready to start working 1 by 1 ribbing. So now we've come to the end of the ribbing portion. I did 8 rows of ribbing, and remember this is going to be the bottom of the tank, so you can make it however long you like according to your preference, but just remember when you put it on, it'll be stretched like this, so it'll look thinner on than it does on the needles. And here is where we're going to switch to the 6.5 millimeter tips or needles if you don't have interchangeables. This is my last stitch. I'm going to take the stitch marker off. That was painful, sorry. Also, when you switch tips, you want to just do this one first instead of both of them at the same time, because then it's harder for the stitches to move off this needle. I'm going to put my stitch marker back on, and then I'm going to actually switch colors, and we're going to be knitting stockinette in the round. So my next color will be this cashmere, and you can cut this yarn and leave a long tail. I like to leave mine pretty long so that later when I weave in my ends, it will be easier. Similarly, when you join your yarn, you want to leave a tail so you can weave it in. what I do is I have the end of the yarn on the left side. I put it over my needle. I take the tail end of the yarn that I just cut off, and then it's under this yarn currently. I pull it over and then wrap it, take this tail, pull it over, and then go through the needle. And you're going to do stockinette for 2 to 3 rounds. Now, if you want your tank top to be longer, right after these 2 rounds, we're going to split off for the sleeve holes. If you want it to be like a waist length tank that actually covers things, you can do however many rows you want. You might want to use your measuring tape to measure like the length of your waist to your armpit, and that's how many rows you'll do. For this tutorial, I'll still be showing the harness version, so I'm only going to do 2 rounds. We're at the end of the first row, so I'm going to switch this needle to a 6.5. And then we'll do our second row. So we finished our second row, and now we're going to knit to the midpoint. So I have 90 stitches, which means I'm going to knit 45 stitches, and then this is where we're going to start breaking off for the front and the back. Here is our midpoint. I'm going to put another stitch marker in a different color right here just to make it easier. And then you're going to purl this row back to your beginning of round, and we're now working flat. So now you should have worked 4 rows on this side. You have the 2 rows that we did in the round, 1 row flat knitting, and 1 row flat purling. The last 2 rows were worked only from the beginning of round stitch marker to the halfway stitch marker. So this is one side. And now we're going to start decreasing for the armholes, and I'm gonna switch colors. You don't have to switch colors as frequently as I do. I just like to do it. Again, you're going to snip your yarn, leave a long tail for weaving in ends. Take your new yarn, also leave a longish tail for weaving in ends. You knit the first stitch, and then now we're going to do a left leaning decrease across these 2 stitches. So slip 1 knitwise, slip 1 purlwise, put this needle back through from left to right, take your yarn and pull it through both stitches. So that is a left leaning decrease. And then you're going to work all the way to this stitch marker until there are 3 stitches left. You're going to do a right leaning decrease here and knit the last stitch. We are at 3 stitches before the marker, so you're going to do a right leaning decrease, which is a knit 2 together. So you slip your needle into both these stitches and then knit the last stitch. For the next row, you're going to purl across, no decreasing, and then for the next row, knit across, purl across. So you have a set basically where the first row was decrease on both sides, and then the next 3 rows are knitting flat, ending with a purl row. So after working those rows, you have 4 rows of the decreased section. On the first row, you did 1 left leaning decrease, 1 right leaning decrease, and then for the next 3 rows, just worked flat with no decreases. And now we're going to repeat this set over again. So on the next row, knit 1 left leaning decrease, knit until there's 3 left, right leaning decrease, knit 1. And then the next 3 rows after that will just be knitting flat. And you're going to repeat this decrease another time after that. So in total, we'll have 12 rows. So 1 set, 1 set, 1 set. So now you've worked 2 sets of this repeating section. This first row was a decrease row. You decreased on both sides. And then 1, 2, 3, knitting flat. This row is a decrease row, and then 1, 2, 3, knitting flat. So we've done it twice, and now we're going to do it one last time, where you knit 1, do a left leaning decrease, so slip knitwise, slip purlwise, insert your needle left to right, wrap, and knit through. At the end of the row, now you only have 3 stitches left, and you're going to do the right leaning decrease, inserting your needle through both, and knit 1. For the next 3 rows, purl 1 row, knit 1 row, purl 1 row, no decreases. So you finished the decrease portion, and you can see it kind of curves nicely inwards. And now I'm going to switch colors. You don't have to. I'm going to do an increase section so that the sleeve ends up like this, kind of. And it's following the same principle as before. So on this first row, we have 12 rows of the decrease portion. On the first row of the increase portion, you're going to knit 1, sorry, it looks super loose because I'm switching colors. You're going to knit 1, and then identify the bar between the 2 stitches and make a right leaning increase. And a right leaning increase, you pick up under the bar with the left needle. You take this and you knit it through the front knitwise. And that is a right leaning increase. And then you're going to knit all the way to the end until there's 1 stitch left before the marker. We're coming up to the last stitch of the first row. And now you're going to make a left leaning increase. So again, identify the bar in between the two stitches, and instead of going from the back this time, you will go through the front. Pick it up so it looks like that, and then you're going to knit through the back loop. So under this front loop, through the back loop here. Oh no. And this is the last stitch. So now you've done an increase row where there are increases on both ends. And just like for the decrease section, you're now going to work 3 rows flat, no increasing. And that whole section, the 4-row repeating section, you're going to do it 3 times total to end with 12 rows for the increase section. So this is one section of the increase portion. We did increase row where you increased on both ends, and then 3 rows working flat. We're going to repeat this 2 more times. So this is now the second set. Knit 1, find the gap, the bar in between, and make a right leaning increase. So you go from behind and then knit from the front. Then you knit all the way across until you get to the last stitch where you'll find the bar, pick it up from the front. Again, coming up to the last stitch, and the right leaning increase, you identify the bar, go front to back underneath it, and then knit through the back loop. So under this, over the back loop, like that. And that is a left leaning increase. And then purl, knit, purl, repeat 1 more time. So you end up with 12 rows of the increase section. Okay, so now we've finished the decrease section and the increase section. I switched colors for the last repeat here, so don't get confused, but this is one section. And you now have this curve. And what we're going to do now is create the neckline and the shoulders. So what you'll do first is knit 6 stitches. And then in this section over here until 6 before the midway point, we're going to cast off all those stitches in between. When you do your first cast off stitch, instead of just going directly into it, we're going to knit in the front and back of the first stitch. And then cast 1 off. So making sure you have 6 here. This will help prevent any gaps. Sometimes there's like this gappy bit when you cast off, and that just helps it not do that. And then we're going to use a stretchy bind off. This is the one I like to use. I don't know if it has a name, but you knit 1, knit 2, and then you place your needle back in from left to right, and knit it. So left to right, wrap your yarn, pull it through. and that will just give you like a stretchy cast off edge. And you'll do that until there's 5 stitches left here and 1 stitch left on your needle for a total of 6. So now we've come to the point where you have 1 stitch here and 5 here, and then you're just going to knit across to the end, so don't cast these off. And you have 1 shoulder here, 1 shoulder here. And then depending on sizing, you're gonna work a few rows. If you want it to sort of hang down off your shoulders eventually, then you might wanna work like 9 or 10 rows. If you want it to be a regular scoop neck tank, then I would say 7 rows. So we'll purl across and knit across just this section a few times, and I'll do 7. So this is 7 rows, and instead of casting off now, what you want to do is get like a holder. It could be like a DPN, but another needle is good, and just transfer those stitches on there. And then we'll hold them there until we do the 3 needle bind off. And you can snip your yarn now. You can leave a long tail for weaving in. And so now we're left with the other side here, and you're going to want to join your yarn here, so join purlwise, and then also knit in stockinette for 7 rows. And similar to the first side, you don't want to cast off, just put it on another needle. Of course, if you don't want to do the 3 needle bind off method, you can always just do a regular cast off and then seam the shoulders together later. It's really whatever you prefer, but this is the method that I'm gonna show. Also, look, there's no gap here because we did the front back thing. So now we've done both shoulders and put them on little holders for later. And what you're left with on your main needles is the other half that you didn't work yet. And what you're going to do now is attach your yarn here on the right side, knit across, purl across, and then just begin repeating the decrease and then increase section and then the shoulder portion. So the back of the tank will be shaped exactly like the front of the tank. And you don't have to use the same colors as the front. I like to mix it up so that the tank is kind of like reversible. If there's a side you like, matches your outfit better. So I like to put a little variety there. But yeah, just attach your yarn here, knit, purl, and that'll make up like these 4 rows here before the decrease section. And then repeat everything we just did for side 1. And also you can keep the shoulder parts on the circular needles this time. You don't have to transfer them to other needles. And then I'll show you how to do the 3 needle bind off. Okay, so you've done the first half and you have your shoulders on these separate needles. And then for the back half, you've done the same as the front. You had these 2 rows that weren't increased or decreased, and then you did the decrease section, and then the increase section and the cast off portion. So now after having worked 1 shoulder, so we haven't connected the other shoulder yet, instead of casting off, we're gonna do a 3 needle bind off. And it's gonna look really confusing because there's all these ends and stuff, but we're gonna try our best. So what you do is you flip it inside out. So we'll have everything like this. And you have your two shoulders together. So the working yarn is still attached here. I haven't detached the working yarn. And what you want to do is essentially, this would work better if it was a double pointed needle, but it doesn't have to be. What you want to do is essentially, you're going to take another needle and knit through both of them and then cast off that way. That's why it's called 3-needle bind off. And we're just going to take a random needle that we have. You can use the other end of the circular too. It's just not as convenient sometimes because it's all. And before you do so, you really want to make sure that you're connecting the right shoulder to the right portion, so you don't end up having like a twisted tank. And this is right, so we will go ahead and do that. So we'll just have like this, and then you go like this through both. And now you have the stitch on the right needle, and then you go another one, making sure you're sticking this needle through both the stitches, and then using this needle, you start casting off. So again, stick this needle through this, and also through this one. Wrap around, and it'll carry through both. Take both off the needles. So now that you have it like this, you can break off the yarn. And fasten off. And now you have one of the shoulders stitched together. If you turn it right side out again, you'll see if you can look past all the ends. Okay, yay! So the shoulders are stitched together, and you didn't have to use a tapestry needle seam. Of course, if you found seaming to be easier, that is totally up to you. And now you have this shoulder still on the second side. We haven't worked it yet, so I'm going to just reconnect my yarn and then repeat what I did, which is turn it inside out, have the right sides touching each other, and then work the 3-needle bind off. Okay, congratulations, you've made the body of the tank. These are the shoulders. It's curling a bit at the top because we used a stretchy bind off. And what we're gonna do now is single crochet all the way around the top portion. You don't have to do this step if you don't want to. If you don't like to crochet or you don't know how to, you can just start picking up into these stitches and do 1 by 1 ribbing off the bat. I like to do the crochet because I feel like it gives it a little bit of structure and, I don't know, some fun texture maybe. So, ooh, what color should I pick? Okay, I have my cashmere. Let's do that. We'll start with a slip knot. And then pick a shoulder to start with. It doesn't really matter which one. I'm gonna start here. And I like to start at the seam here because I don't know, it just makes me feel better, like I could potentially hide the beginning of round better here. And what you want to do when you pick up from crochet into knitting is pretty similar to picking up knitting in general. You want to identify this sort of column here, and you want the column to at least be 2 like strands away from the edge. So like this is one strand, this is the second strand. So you have that. Have the slip knot on and just single crochet into there. And then similarly, if you just follow along this like column here, here's the next one, here's the next one. I find that easier than looking to like how many stitches on the side. So here, 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 you just follow it all the way up. And try to keep your tension kind of like corresponding with the height of the stitch. You don't want it too tight because you don't want to cinch it, and you also don't want it to be much looser because then the neck will continue to curl. And here it's already kind of to the bottom. Here you can jump from this stitch to the beginning of the collar. And you can kind of identify it because it has like the little V on top, and you just want to slip the crochet hook underneath those 2 V's. It can be a little tough on the first couple ones. Yeah, there we go. And similarly, you want to go under these 2 V's. And basically just single crochet all the way around the top portion until you get back to where you started. So we're back to where we started from, and you're just gonna slip your needle, or your hook, sorry, and then back into the first stitch, and then do a slip stitch and tighten. And then you'll repeat around one more time. And for me, I like to do a waistcoat stitch so that it still looks knit, but honestly, whatever you feel like doing, you can do another row of single crochet, you could do back loop only to get that little ridged edge. And to do waistcoat, you just slip your hook in between like these 2 V's, and then it'll create kind of like an illusion of a knit stitch, like that. So just go all the way around, and then when you get back to the beginning again, slip stitch, and then break off your yarn and fasten off. Okay, so now we've come to the end of the second row, and I've just slip stitched back into the first stitch so that it has this kind of like seamless edge. And now you can break off your yarn and just fasten off. And then the next thing we're going to do is the neckline ribbing. So you have your crochet portion, and then you're going to take your needles, and they're going to be the 4.5 millimeters again. And you're just going to take whatever color you want for the ribbing and start picking up. So the way you pick up, I'll go into the first stitch under these two loops, like the V's of the crochet, take my yarn, and then just pick up like that. Just all the way around. And even though you're going to do ribbing, you don't have to pick up in ribbing. I find that it gives it like a neater edge if you just pick up knitwise regularly throughout the whole thing and then start your ribbing, and it doesn't really make that big of a difference. You can't really tell, especially if you have like a fuzzier yarn. So just pick up all the way around. Once you get to the end of the pickup round, you have a bunch of stitches now all across the top on your needle, and you can just slip your stitch marker there to denote the beginning of round, and then start knitting in 1 by 1 ribbing. If you like to count your stitches just to make sure that they're even, that's great. And if you don't and somehow end up with an odd number of stitches, you can also just knit together the first of your round if you've already counted and you find there's an odd number, or if you get to the end and you realize there's like too many stitches and it's an odd number, you can just knit 2 together on the last knit before the end. And just knit in 1 by 1 ribbing. Oh no. All the way around. And you're going to knit for, I like to do either the same amount of rows as I did on the bottom or one less because it won't stretch out as much as the bottom one. So if I did like 7 or 8 rows, I might do 6 or 7 up top. But again, it's whatever you prefer, whatever you like the look of. And that'll be your neck and shoulder ribbing. So at this point, we've worked the desired number of rows for the ribbing. I did 6, including that pickup row where I picked up into the crochet section. And now we're just going to do a stretchy bind off. Here's my stitch marker for the beginning of round, and a stretchy bind off for ribbing. The way I do it is that I work the next 2 stitches in ribbing, and then since this last one was a purl stitch, I stick my needle in left to right from the front to the back as if I were purling basically. And then the next stitch is a knit stitch. So now I'm going to insert from left to right, but in the front, and then work those 2 stitches off the needle. And you just keep repeating that pattern. So this one was a purl stitch, so I'm going to insert my needle from left to right, front to back. And you're gonna do this all the way around for the stretchy cast off until you get back to where your marker is. So this is the last stitch now, and what I usually do to kind of close it off is I'll put my needle back into the very first cast off stitch, pull it through, and then pull this other stitch off of it like that. And then tighten and pull my yarn long to cast off and break off the yarn. So now you've finished the tank top portion, and if it looks a little bumpy because you use different yarns and stuff, which is what I do, don't worry about it. It'll block out when you wash it. Also might look bumpy because look how many ends there are. We'll take care of that later. You can end it like this and just do the sleeve ruffles if you want to do the mini tank version. If you want to do the sleeves, I'll show you how to do that in the next portion of the video. So now I'm just going to show you how to do the sleeve ruffles. And what you want for that is your crochet hook and preferably a mohair to make the ruffles look a little more seamless. Since it is crochet, you'll be able to see like the little stitches. If you don't crochet and you want to do ruffles, there are definitely a lot of tutorials out there on how to do knit ruffles, and you would pick up with your knitting needles into like the stitches on the side of the arm here and just follow one of those. I'm sure you guys can figure it out. So you want to start off by taking the mohair and making a slip knot onto your hook, and then starting where the armpit is, you go into this edge stitch right here, and then into the next edge stitch. And you'll notice that usually you would have like 2 strings here, but you only have 1 for now, and it's just to connect these 2 edges together so that there isn't that gap in between. And then from here you want to identify the space between the edge stitch and the second stitch of the row, and just start crocheting up that column. And do this all the way around. So like up here and then back down, and then you'll connect with a slip knot. So once you get all the way back to the beginning where you initially started the crochet, just do a slip knot into the first stitch. And then to make the ruffle portion now, what you're going to do is single crochet into the next stitch, and then chain 4 stitches, and then single crochet back into the same stitch, and then kind of tighten it a little. So it creates this like little ruffle. There's a hole in between, but when there's so many ruffles, you can't really tell. And it doesn't like affect the overall look of it, in my opinion. If it really bothers you, then I think a knit ruffle would probably be the best way to go. And in the next stitch, again, single crochet, chain 4, and then single crochet back into the same stitch. It's important to do this like in the same stitch portion because that's kind of what creates the crowding of it. And if you want your ruffles to be longer, you can just chain more stitches, although I think the effect looks best when there's about 3 to 5, I would say. And you just repeat that all the way around for 1 round. Okay, so now you've come to the end of the ruffle section. You've worked the last stitch, and you just slip stitch back into the beginning single crochet stitch and fasten off. And you can cut your yarn and fasten off. So now you've completed the sleeve ruffle, and you'll just repeat that for the other side to finish off your tank. Ta-da! And if it looks kind of like curled in at the sleeve edges, it will block out once you wash it. Or even when you put it on, I think it'll just sort of even out. And you can repeat for the other side, starting at the armpit once again, going around. And then you'll have your finished tank. So for the sleeve side, I'm now going to show you the way that I pick up the stitches and then the instructions for the sleeve. So for the sleeve modification, you want to pick up with your 12mm 16-inch short circulars and just pick up into every other stitch. So essentially you just identify the stitch you're going to pick up into, like the column that you're going to pick up into. Take your yarn, leave a long tail for weaving in later, and then just start picking up. And because the needles are so much bigger than the ones we use for the body, I skip a stitch in between. So instead of picking up directly into the next stitch, you'll skip one and pick up that way, and just do every other stitch. Until you go all the way around, and then you'll put a stitch marker at the beginning of the round. This light section is a little easier to see on, so I'll show you here picking up the stitches once again. So you've picked up into this stitch, so you'll skip this next stitch and then pick up into this stitch, following like that line, that column in between. So this is like one set of stitches and this is another set, and you just want to go in between. And there's a stitch right here in the middle. We're going to skip that one and go directly to this one. There's a stitch in the middle here. We're going to skip it and go here. And repeat that all the way around. So I ended with 36 stitches, which is about how many you should have if you did the same measurements as me. And just a note, if you went for like a larger sizing and in between here, instead of just doing decreases and increases, you added a middle portion where there were like more rows so that it would fit up over the shoulders, then you're going to have more sleeve stitches. And similarly, if you're using smaller needles or you did like a smaller version of this decrease increase situation, you're gonna have less stitches. For the first part of the arm worked down past the elbow, it's going to be constant and there won't be any increases. But if you want to do like a flared sleeve, I'm going to do some like basic increases in the round. After it's reached like a certain length, you're gonna have to adjust the numbers for that. And it should be fairly easy, I think. Just try to end up with like an even number that's divisible by some other number. So you can add increases throughout in the round. And then also, depending on the length of your arm, you can change the number of rows that you work. So now we're working on the sleeve portion, and it's gonna take me a while to actually knit the sleeve, so I'm just gonna show you the general guidelines that I follow for my sleeve, and you might have to adjust these numbers if you're using smaller needles or you just chose a different size than me and you don't have like 36 stitches. So what you want to do is make a number of rows from here to here. This is probably just below the crook of your elbow, like your elbow might be here. And this is where you'll start adding the stripes and flaring out. If you don't want to add stripes, you can also just ignore all the parts that say contrasting color and just keep it to one color. But this is how I do it, adding stripes and the flare at the same time. So start off with 35 rows, and that'll be the same 36 stitches that I have on the needle right now. And 35 is just from my own experience of how long I want it to be. Ultimately, I want it to end up kind of past my wrist. And then 3 rows contrasting color. So MC is main color, CC is contrasting color. When I get 35 rows in, the next 3 rows I'll change colors and do 3 rows of the contrasting color that I've chosen for my stripe. Another row of the main color, so this like pinkish brown again. And then I get to an increase row. I have 36 stitches, so I wanted to increase evenly 4 times throughout the entire row. If you did it with smaller needles and you have like double the amount of stitches, then maybe you want to increase 8 times, just to get a proportional flare. So I've increased 4 times here, which means I knit 9, and then I do an increase of my choice. I usually like to do a right-leaning increase. And that'll also be in the main color. And you end up with 40 stitches, because we've increased 4 times. And if you don't have a number that's divisible by 4 or 8, it doesn't have to be 4 or 8 specifically. You can kind of just like decide on a number that works for you. Like if you only have a number that's divisible by 5, then maybe you'll increase by 5. And it all depends on how big you want the flare. So after the increase row, another row of the main color. So we're like here now. And then we switch to 3 rows of the contrasting color. So still 40 stitch count. And then the next row, we're going to do another increase row. So knit 10 and then increase, and just repeat that around the round until you get back to the beginning, and that increases by 4 stitches. And that's still in the contrasting colors. So the first stripe is 3 rows long and the second stripe is 4 rows long, so it's just slightly bigger. And then you switch back to your main color, and you won't need the contrasting color for the rest of the sleeve. And you do 4 rows in the main color, 44 stitches still. Then on the 5th row, you knit 11, increase, again adding 4 to make 48, and then another 4 rows and cast off. So I'll show you when I get to those stages, just like what it looks like, if that helps you. But I just wanted to lay it out for you so that if you need to do some math or kind of write it out for yourself, that you know what to do before you get there. So there's some sleeve planning involved. Okay, so we've come to the portion of the sleeve now where we've finished the first 35 rows, and we're gonna start adding our stripes. If you don't wanna add stripes, that's totally fine. You can just skip this part and keep knitting until the increases. And I'm just gonna show you quickly the color changing method I use again. I'll have to take this first stitch off. I did it so that the stitch marker wouldn't fall off. Okay, so you insert your needle, take your new yarn, tail on the left side, and you want to leave it slightly long so you can weave it in later. Hook it over, and then take your old yarn, toss it over. Now wrap with your new yarn, and then the tail, which had been under here, you just sort of lift over, and that's it. It is a knotless join, so theoretically you don't have to knot it when you weave in your ends, but I still do just for security. And you're gonna do 3 rows of this color, no increasing yet. Okay, so we've finished the 3 rows, and we're going to switch back to our main color. So we'll just snip this yarn kind of long, and then we'll take our main color again and attach it, and then we're going to work for 1 row, still no increasing, and then on the second row we'll increase. Oops. Now we'll do our first increase row to create the flare. So if you remember, I had 36 stitches around, and I'm going to increase by 4, so 36 divided by 4 is 9, so I'm going to knit 9 stitches and then do an increase. Okay, so that's 9 stitches. I'm going to count just to be sure. And then you can use an increase of your choice. It can be like a knit front and back, or make one right or make one left. I prefer the make one right. So I'm just going to pick up that bar in between the stitches from the back to the front, and then knit through the front. And I've increased by 1. So I'm going to repeat this all the way around to the beginning of round again. So another 9 stitches, increase, 9 stitches, increase, 9 stitches, increase. And that'll bring us back to the beginning of the round. At the end of the increase row, I now have 40 stitches, and I'm just gonna work 1 more row in the main color before we start our second stripe. Now we're switching to our second contrasting color. You can use the same one as before if you want the stripes to be the same color. I'm going to use a second contrasting color. And again, we'll just do the color change. And we're gonna knit the next 3 rounds in this color with no increases. Here we are at the end of our 3 rows we just did in the contrasting color, and then we're going to do another increase row. So the last increase row, we increased by 4 over 36 stitches. This time we have 40 stitches, and we're still going to increase by 4. So we will knit 10 and then increase, and then just repeat that all the way around until you get to the end. Okay, that's our 10 stitches. And we're going to do an increase from behind and then knit through the front loop. And then repeat around until you get back to the beginning. Okay, we've reached the end of our increase row. And now, finally switching colors one last time, we're gonna go back to the main color. And we're gonna work the rest of the time in this main color. We'll do 4 rows of the main color and then do another increase row. So now we've come to the end of these 4 rows we worked back in the main color, and we're going to do another increase row, this time increasing over 44 stitches 4 times. So I went ahead and knit the first 11 stitches so you wouldn't have to watch me do that. And now I'm going to do the increase. And you just repeat that around, another 11 stitches, increase, etc., until you get back to the beginning. And that will be our last increase row. Back to the beginning of the round, and that was our last increase row. And we're just gonna go ahead and finish the sleeve by knitting another 4 rows, no increases, in your main color. We're at the end of our 4 rows, just flat stockinette in the round, no increases, and that's the end of the sleeve. And we're just gonna cast off. You don't have to do a stretchy cast off for this one since the sleeve is so wide. You won't need it, but you do want to try and cast off kind of loosely because you don't want it to have like a cinched effect. So I'm just going to do like a normal cast off and try to stretch my stitches a tiny bit wider than they are, so I can have like a nice cast off. And when you get to the very end and it's your last stitch, what I like to do is find the first stitch here, here, and kind of like insert my knitting needle underneath the top of it and pull both over, tighten it, and then you can remove your needle and snip your yarn, leaving a tail for weaving in, and just fasten off. And that's the end of the knitting portion of your sleeve. Next, we're going to add ruffles. If you don't want ruffles, totally fine. That will be the end of your sleeve. Okay, so now we've finished the sleeve and we're gonna add a crochet border and the ruffles. Earlier I'd said you need a 4.5mm hook. Because the sleeves are bigger, the stitches are bigger, and If you aren't comfortable with changing your tension with a smaller hook, I would recommend using an 8mm hook. I can crochet either very loosely or very tightly, so I'm just gonna go ahead and use my 4.5mm hook. We're gonna make a slip knot, and then just insert our hook underneath the top of each stitch. So you'll see the 2 bars here. And then we're going to single crochet all around the border. And you can kind of like pull on it and check as you go to make sure it's not cinching the sleeve by being too tight. Now we're coming up to the beginning of the round again. I just made my last single crochet of the round, and I'll insert the hook back into the first stitch and just work a slip stitch to join it in the round. And now we're going to do the ruffles. If you watched the ruffle section for the tank sleeve, it's similar, but it's going to be a little more spaced out, not as roughly. So what we're going to do is chain, and you can keep a tighter tension here. You don't have to do it as loosely as you were before. Chain 4 to 5. It's up to you and how tall you want the ruffle to be. And then single crochet into the next stitch. So when we were doing it on the tank sleeve, we were doing it into the same stitch. But for this, we'll just single crochet into the next stitch. Chain 5 again, and then into the next stitch. And you'll just repeat that all the way around and it'll create this cute ruffle. So we're coming up to the end of the round. Here's my last little ruffle. And then you're just going to slip stitch back into the very first stitch that you made. Tighten it, and then you can cut your yarn and fasten off. And that is the end of the sleeve. Next, we're just gonna do the final touches. We're almost done. And I'm gonna make a little star to sew on the front, and then an I-cord bow that goes around the collar. If you don't have like a little I-cord machine and you don't feel like hand knitting it that long, you can also use a ribbon or like a crochet cord, because it takes less time. So I'll just show you how I make the star. First you do a magic circle. And then in the circle, we're gonna do 5 single crochets. And then you tighten your circle. It might be a little hard when you have mohair, but it should still work. And you have your 5 stitches here. You'll go around to the very first one, insert your hook. Oh no, it's really small. And then make a slip stitch so it's connected. It's like a little circle. You'll chain 5, and then counting down from your chain, you'll slip stitch into the first stitch. single crochet into the second stitch, half double crochet into the third, and double crochet into the fourth stitch. So you're gonna skip the first stitch that's like right under where your hook is. Slip stitch into the second stitch, single crochet into the third stitch, do a half double, which is wrapping your yarn, going in, wrapping it again, and then pulling through all 3 loops, and then a double, which is wrapping, putting it through the loop, wrapping again, wrapping and pulling through the first 2 stitches, wrapping, pulling through the last 2 stitches. And that's like one leg of the star. Then you'll identify the next stitch. So not the one you chained out of, but the one next to it. Put your hook there and slip stitch it together. And that's one leg. And then you'll repeat the process by chaining 5 again, and repeating what we just did for the next legs until you get all the way around and you have 5 legs. Now that you've done all 5 legs, I'm just going to show you attaching the last one into the last stitch with a slip stitch, and you have your little star. And what I do to kind of make it look nicer is I slip stitch around the edge of it. So you kind of just find like whatever stitch you can make, like put your needle into, sorry, your hook. Here, I want to put it like not in this gap directly, but just into the side of one of the stitches. Pull through and slip stitch, and it'll create this like nice stitch that lays flat on top. So it kind of gives the star a border. And you just kind of slip stitch all the way around. Here in the top stitch. And then you can kind of turn it as you go. And you can see it's already making like that line. And then down the side again. And then up the second leg. So you'll just repeat that all the way around until you get to the beginning and do a slip stitch here and bind off. And then we can sew it onto the front or the back of the tank, whatever you prefer. So here are the little like appliques that I'm going to sew onto the tank. I made the one big star, and then I made 2 smaller stars just by using like a much smaller hook. You can either do 1 or 2 or, you know, whatever, up to you. I'm just gonna sew them down. I think I like them in this like, in this arc shape instead of just flat, so I'm gonna do that. And what I normally do is I just sort of like use the end / the tail that was at the beginning of the magic circle, and I just stick it through with a needle to kind of center it. And then I take the tail, which I left long, and I sew just through the edge of the slip stitches I made around to like pin it down, and then I tie it in the back. So now we've sewn on our stars, and it's okay if they're not perfect or they're not perfectly aligned. I kind of just approximately place mine and then sew them on. I think it gives it a little bit of charm, and you know, nothing's perfect, so don't worry if it's a little wonky. And the final thing we're gonna do is just make an I-cord bow. You can make it however long you like. Have the bow in the middle. I'm gonna have my bow on the side here to sort of balance out the sleeve. And I use this I-cord machine, but of course doable by hand. And if you don't feel like it, either crochet chain or ribbon will also do. And what I recommend is that you get a piece of scrap yarn and kind of wrap it around this area and make your bow just so you can generally see how long it's going to be, and then hold that up to your I-cord so you know. And then I'll show you how I sew it in. So now we've finished our I-cord, and I'm going to show you how I put it through the top. And you don't want to weave in the ends on your I-cord just yet, because that'll make it easier for you to get it through the ribbing. So determine where you want your bow to be, and that's where you'll start sewing in. So I want mine to kind of be near the front on one side, so I'll start here, and you kind of just like open it up and take a look at the knit stitches, and you'll slide it under a knit stitch, not the first one but the one right above it, over a purl stitch, and then under the next knit stitch. It's kind of hard to see because the yarn is dark, but so you'll skip the purl stitch, go under the knit stitch, and then just pull the cord through, and you'll get that like sort of dotted effect. And you just do that all the way around, pulling your cord through until you get here, and then adjusting your cord so that the two ends are like the same length. So again, you go over the purls and under the knits, and you want to consistently stay under the second stitch. And you can use your finger to kind of even it out. So here is our I-cord all woven in, and I'm just gonna tie the bow. You can either make a knot or not, you know, totally up to you. And I just want to show you how I try to like adjust the bow so that it lays flat more. Okay. Oh, so cute. Okay. So here sometimes it'll like go like this, and what I do is I just take the back one and thread it through the front so that both are like in the front, and that helps it lay flat. Just a little trick. And then now we'll weave in the ends on our I-cord. And it's really easy. You just put the loose end through the tapestry needle and kind of find like the center of the cord. It can be hard sometimes if you've tied it off really tight, but you just go through one of the stitches if you can't find the center, and you kind of push the needle all the way through the inside of the cord and then out one of the stitches and just pull it through. And then you can kind of like cinch it a tiny bit before you cut your yarn. And then pull it out again, and it's just in the middle. And that's how I weave in my I-cord ends.